So you saw earlier on in our architecture, our pillars, the architecture slide, the four key principles. Analytics is one of the core underlying principles that we have, the pillars of DNA. As with things like virtualization, when we were having the discussion, we started to get into a bit of the detail, and it's building on stuff we've done. So you almost start the conversation, well, a bit, well, don't we know that? You know, aren't we doing that kind of thing? And as we look through the analytics, we're just going to show you where we've come from in the kind of tactical delivery of specific kind of analytics, and where we're going with the open APIs and the programmability that we're talking about is actually setting the scene for us to be able to build much more powerful, in-depth, automated analytical information from the network as we go forwards. But this pillar here sort of most naturally fits on top and after. You've got the core infrastructure and you've got these applications and the systems working in place. So this one will be the one that takes a bit longer for you to see what it is that we're actually building. But what we're trying to do here is give you an idea of where we've got to so far, has set the foundation for that, and how you can then start to look at building on what we have today for your own customers. So in terms of analytics so far, we've talked to you a lot over the years about business intelligence, getting useful, relevant business information out of the underlying infrastructure. And examples that we've used here and talked about in depth and can go into much more depth on each of these are ones like CMX, for example, your location-based analytics for wireless. Prime with the Prime Analytics, giving you more information about your infrastructure and top 10 hosts and this kind of thing. And StealthWatch, where we'll actually then looking at security across the infrastructure. Now, these all are based on this sort of principle of something in the network that's creating information and being able to then gather that through to a point where we can then do something to crunch that, and then taking that to a point where we can present that in the useful terms that you need to be able to make a business decision, rather than having to unscramble all this data right at the bottom of the stack. Yeah? So with CMX, for example, a lot of the data that we're creating here and the sensing is on the position. It's a low-level positioning of where the clients are, the triangulation between different access points. But what you actually want to get up here is the coordinates that put a blue dot on the store map. And so you can then work out which shelf they're in front of to be able to sell them something. Yeah? So with each of these, as we've been developing these in the background, the principles of what we've been doing are encapsulated in those deliveries. So with CMX, right, we take that information about sensing where the clients are, where they are relative to the location of the access points, and where those access points are relative to your building, your physical assets. Right? And from that, we're able to present to you at the higher level the presence, the access, the ability to log in, and the location-based part of this. Yeah? So that's all kind of straightforward, and we're all quite familiar with that. This is an example of the whole kind of analytics stack, but really in a localized environment, because the CMX that we're talking about a shopping environment, a single campus, for example. It's a sort of local part of your network where this applies, because that's where the technology and the business case applies. Yeah? That model, though, that we talked about is just as relevant. With Prime, the kind of thing we're talking about is giving you a bit more insight as to what applications are running on your network underneath. What are the hosts, the top clients that are generating traffic on your network. And this is basically gathering information from the flows and from points in the network and presenting that with something that then gives you the opportunity to go, oh, interesting, why is that application one of the most prevalent on my network when I didn't think we would be able to use it? And start to present that in some way that you can drill down then into where that fits into your business policies. Yeah? With this, we're starting to talk about that analytics process, the data gathering, now being stretched out not from one campus, but across your network and across the depth and breadth of your network. And so we're starting to gather from a much wider base, which means we then need to aggregate that into a complete picture for the whole network, but you want to be presented with the simple business decisions at the top. The next evolution of that we've seen, we're familiar with StealthWatch, is taking that one step further. So now we're gathering real-time information on flows as they're being set up and traffic's moved around the network. We are then pulling that and aggregating that together. We are then using that initially to understand what traffic is going from A to B, what applications are being used from A to B, and we can then map those to, do we trust those applications or not? Are we detecting malware, signatures of malware operating on our network behind the firewalls? But the next layer of evolution that we have here, on top of the almost like the read-only kind of stuff that we're getting from this, is that we can then use that information in the analytics to enforce dynamic policy as well. So you go from network as a sensor to tell you, to present you with a dashboard of what's going on, to network as an enforcer, that where you can set policy that says, right, we see something that we don't like going on in the network here. Let's make sure that we now change the policy and push that out so that that doesn't spread across the network. And so this analytical model, right, in each case, it's spreading much further across the network, and it's becoming much more interactive and dynamic in the network. So, as we now move to the point where instead of all this stuff happening in the network in closed environments, and we provide the tools to bring this up to you, we're now moving through APIC and through the other kind of applications we've been talking about here into having open APIs to allow you to be able to develop applications that go down and request this kind of information. So the kind of scenarios that we have today that build on what we've been talking about, right, we have, there's an application we call Protactive here. Our tech engineers, whenever you call in with a problem, they diagnose that problem, they've been recording what the issue is and what config lines have created that, and what the solution is to do something with it. And they then built this into a database, and they've got over 10,000, effectively, knowledge bytes that are based on knowledge that's been captured from real-world issues where we've had customers phoning them with support. What they're now doing is saying, we have all that information. If we can expose that through an API that you can reach to say, here's a config, go and tell me, scan that through your knowledge base, almost like an antivirus scanner. Scan it all the way through, come back and give me a report. And it says, you have 2 known security vulnerabilities. You have 10 weaknesses on best practice. You haven't set, you haven't locked down the password on this particular aspect of the command line. Or this is, you don't have you don't have quality of service enabled in this kind of way. We can then give you a report on that that allows you to learn from the mistakes that have happened in the past to start to optimize your network. And if you then take that and you get to the point where you're comfortable to then use tools like APKM Prime to go and dynamically change the policy and fix that, you can start to get to the point where you can almost get to almost a self-healing network. It's you making a point of, I want to go out, I want to apply the best practices, and then I want to decide that those corrections go into the network to make sure that I'm not building weaknesses throughout my infrastructure. Yeah? All this takes place by pulling stuff out of places like APKM, passing it through APIs, it's Protactive, getting the answers back, and then whether you as individuals or your next Python script, your next application, does something with that. That's the next level of this, opening up this analytics.
Surely you won't do any configuration, so it will be policy based.
Eventually, there's still going to be situations where if you've got network devices that are still accessible by people who can log in, right, there's always going to be a risk that somebody might change something. We will, as we automate those processes of verification, right, we'll bring that security that you're looking for in the configuration that will lower that risk and lower that risk and lower that risk. Yeah? If you haven't got to that point yet and you want to use this on the network infrastructure you have in place, so you put APKM on your brownfield infrastructure, use APKM to get this information out, put it into Protactive, this will start to tell you what your baseline is that you need to start to fix and the policies that maybe you need to go and prioritize to say, right, now with APKM, I want to push that out. Yep. This other one here, we quote this. There's a public link that you can find out a little bit more about this. Inside Cisco, we've gone through this kind of process as well. We have these probes that are looking for traffic inside the network for IT to be able to implement policy about what we're doing. Now, originally, to be able to get this third-party package, the 1,000 eyes package, out to all the branches and out to different parts of the network, we were doing what we said at the beginning of the NFV thing. We were putting, as it was Mac Minis, we were putting hardware appliances into our branches, into our buildings and the campuses, to be able to host this third-party application so that we could use that to scan the traffic as it was at the edge of the network. What we've now done is instead of following that model, we've effectively virtualized that process. We now put the thousandized software into a virtual service directly on the ISRs, on the edge of our network, in the way that we showed you earlier on with the service containers. So we're taking away all the disadvantages and the cost of management that we were talking about physical appliances in the NFV model. We're using this particular thing in Polaris to do this. But we've now deployed this as a way of getting the data capture part of the analytics established cost effectively around the network, and then we use those cloud services to bring that up and present us with information. So as we sort of build the capability to touch more information and bring more information out with APIs, there are two things. One is we can then start to provide other applications that sit on top, whether they're through third parties or we develop them, where we decide the kind of next level up from Prime in terms of assurance of your network is to see exactly what's going on. And when we see fault coming up on your wireless access points, for example, we can maybe present you with some information about, do I decide to do something with it? Do I leave that because that's acceptable in my policy? What do I do with it? Right? Or we can start to combine this information with third-party sources and give us much more broader depth of applications, or you can build applications that give your customers much more value add across the network, because underneath we're providing the core capability of getting these analytics services of data gathering, data aggregation into your network. And we will be building more tools to help make this work more easily in the way that we've been building tools like APKM to help the automation part of the process work more easily for you as time goes on. So that's just really where we can stay, where we're going to sit with the analytics at the moment. There are, as I say, you can have a look at those, the third-party ones there. Look at those. You can even try those in the labs, see how they work. We're going to then, at this point, just close the analytics part down. It's to watch this space a little bit further, but the strategy we have in DNA is to make this as important as the automation, virtualization, and the cloud parts that you can see that are visible today. So I'm going to hand over to James.